Hello students, today we are going to get into another session in the same chapter, that is life processes, and we are going to take up respiration today. So you all know what is meant by respiration. So the first session we understood that how the nutrition takes place and why food is important for us. Now the food we eat has to liberate energy. So for it to do so, respiration comes to the rescue. So respiration is the process by which the food is generally oxidized so that it releases energy for various activities. With that introduction, let's go into what all we are going to see in this particular session. What is respiration and why do we need these processes? That means what is the meaning of respiration and why exactly we need to have this particular process. Next, what are the different organs of respiration in animals? So different animals, that is especially the lower organisms, have different ways of respiring. And do all animals respire the same? That we will try to understand as we go through the session. Now, what are the different pathways of breakdown of glucose? So the energy, which is the food which liberates glucose, has to be broken down to release energy. So various methods how the glucose can be broken down can be seen in this particular topic. Then differences between breathing in aquatic and terrestrial animals. So we will try to understand whether the land animals and the terrestrial animals breathe the same and they require the same amount of air. So with this introduction, let's get into this particular topic. The first one, we will try to understand what are the different respiratory organs in different animals. Now, we all know we breathe through lungs. Now, it is not so with the lower organisms because they do not have this particular kind of complex organs for them to respire. So, looking at the lower organisms, you can see generally till that is from amoeba till earthworms, which belong to the phylum that is Annelida. Generally, it is through the body surface, and then they have very simple technique that is called as the diffusion. Now, coming to arthropods, arthropods are little more developed than the other organisms. So you find various types of organs for breathing. Now, gills or branchiae, you see in the case of crustaceans and horseshoe crab. Now, book gills are the respiratory organs when it comes to scorpions. Then book lungs when it comes to spiders. Then tracheal system seen in insects, and the tracheal system opens to the outside by means of spiracles in case of insects. Mollusca have a ctenidium, otherwise called as gills. Similar to gills, ctenidium in mollusca, and echinodermata, you have the dermal branchiae or papillae. Now, these are the different organs, and you all know higher vertebrates breathe through, in fishes, it is through gills because they are all aquatic. And the tetrapods, that is the amphibians, the reptiles, aves, that is birds and mammals, all of them have lungs. Now, an exception to this particular rule, that is tetrapods, we have amphibians. Now, amphibians, they are surviving both on land and water, right? So they can breathe, they have to breathe in water as well as on land. So they, apart from having this lungs, they also breathe through the skin, which is called cutaneous respiration. And they also breathe through the buccal cavity, that is buccopharyngeal respiration. Now, amphibians can breathe with all these things, and since a tadpole is one of the stages of amphibians when they undergo metamorphosis, tadpoles breathe with the help of gills. So you have various methods used in amphibians. Through the skin, through that is cutaneous respiration, through the mouth, that is buccopharyngeal respiration. You have the gills in the tadpole stage, and the adult amphibians can breathe even through lungs. So when you breathe through lungs, we call that respiration as pulmonary respiration. We call it as pulmonary respiration. Skin is cutaneous, buccal cavity, buccopharyngeal, and through gills, another type of respiration. Okay. Since we have seen what are the organs of respiration, let's take up what are the different kinds of respiration we come across, depending whether the organism needs oxygen or it can respire without oxygen. Now, respiration can be divided into aerobic respiration, that is in the presence of oxygen, and then you have anaerobic respiration. So aerobic is in the presence of oxygen. We all know food contains what is called as glucose. That's what we learned. So glucose should be generally broken down to release the energy. So the major substrate we look at when we talk about respiration is glucose. We'll just look at what it produces. Glucose in the presence of oxygen gives out carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So when we did the nutrition in plants, we saw that the oxygen was released by the plants, and that oxygen will help us to utilize so that we release carbon dioxide, which can be actually taken up by the plants back for their photosynthesis. Now we look at the formula C6H12O6, that is glucose. In the presence of oxygen, it gives rise to carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Now, the energy, we will be talking about what is the energy in the later part of the session, but energy is generally in the form of ATP. And you will find there is more energy liberated, right? So you have more energy because you're eating food, you're utilizing it, then you are digesting it, and then you have more amount of energy liberated when you have your food. So the energy is generally more when we utilize oxygen, and anaerobic respiration is without oxygen. So there are two methods we'll be studying. So one is with the help of yeast, where it gives rise to ethanol, that is an alcohol, and carbon dioxide, and less amount of energy. Now this happens in the case of yeast cells, and we call this as fermentation. Now, the same thing when it happens with the muscle cells. I'm sure many of you, when you run, we must have seen getting cramps in the legs. Now, the muscle cramps which form are because of the less amount of oxygen, which gives rise to lactic acid and energy. There is no carbon dioxide liberated during the muscle anaerobic respiration. You find carbon dioxide only in the case of fermentation. Now you all know what is fermentation. Now fermentation, because it releases carbon dioxide, it is used in the baking industry. Now these are the two different types of respiration. One in aerobic respiration with the help of oxygen, where it liberates more amount of energy, and anaerobic respiration where there is less amount of energy produced. Now, let's look at the different pathways, how energy is liberated through respiration. Now, you can see glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. When we already wrote this formula, we have written it is C6, so it is a 6-carbon molecule. Now, initially the respiration starts with the cytoplasm of a cell, where the 6-carbon compound will break down into 2 molecules of 3-carbon molecules. Now, this particular step is common between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now, the production of the pyruvate compound or pyruvic acid, 2 molecules of pyruvate is produced. And this 3-carbon molecule is a common point for both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now, what happens after that? If there is no oxygen, as we already seen in the case of yeast, now what happens? It produces alcohol and carbon dioxide and less amount of energy. The energy is just close to 2 ATP, which is produced here. And if there is no oxygen, that is your muscles are very tired because lack of oxygen, which causes cramps, it produces lactic acid. And in the case of oxygen, it produces more energy, carbon dioxide and water. It is 38 ATP. So you can just look at ATP levels. And what is the full form of ATP? It is adenosine triphosphate. And this energy, we all have studied previously, cell, that mitochondria is called the powerhouse of the cell and ATP is called the energy currencies. Now, ATP is produced, whatever aerobic respiration occurs, it occurs in mitochondria. It occurs in mitochondria. Now, this particular, you divide them into two steps. The one which occurs in cytoplasm, we call it as glycolysis. And one which occurs in the presence of oxygen, we call it as Krebs cycle. This is another name given for with oxygen, that is in mitochondria, Krebs cycle. And glycolysis, as I already told you, it is a common point between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now, these are all the pathways through which glucose molecule circulates. So how exactly is energy produced from whatever we eat? And you have so many types of food which liberate different amounts of energy. You all know we have different kinds of foods, that is proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. All three will liberate energy, but generally the carbohydrates are supposed to be releasing more amount of energy. Next comes the fats and next comes the proteins. So the energy is all measured in the form of kilojoules, or it can also be used in the form of calories. So you all come across people who are exercising, you know, people who eat in moderate, they pick up foods to eat to find out what food exactly releases more amount of energy. People don't involve with carbohydrates because these are all sugars, and proteins do not give the amount of energy, but proteins, people when compared to sugars, they're more onto the proteins, and here you have less amount of fats. So the food we eat is broken down and the amount of energy depends on the particular kind of food we eat. Now the energy comes because the food we eat is oxidized. That's what we took as an equation. The oxidization of that particular food has to be done so that there is more amount of energy liberated there. So we have already seen that anaerobic respiration gives out less amount of energy. So more oxygen levels, more amount of energy for various activities. Now, what is the difference between the respiration when it comes in aquatic and terrestrial animals? We all know fishes, and we must have seen that fishes come out sometimes to breathe in. And also you see fishes constantly opening their mouths. And why do they do so? Why do they do so? They do this because they want to take more amount of oxygen. So fishes, why do they come and open their mouths constantly to take more amount of oxygen? Why is it like that? Which doesn't happen in normal terrestrial animals. Now, the difference between these two is water contains less amount of oxygen as compared to that of the terrestrial animals. So we have well-developed lungs to do so. So we are able to take in more oxygen with the help of the lungs. And our lungs have that particular platform where there is a lot of exchange in that particular area. Now here the fishes, it's not like that. They all breathe by means of gills. And the only way is they open the mouth, take in water, the water which moves on to pass on to the gills. So for requiring more oxygen, they keep opening the mouth and closing their mouth. So that is because water contains less amount of dissolved oxygen as compared to that of terrestrial animals. Now, terrestrial animals have been adapted to that particular life. So it is the same thing with us. When we enter or when we go inside water, underwater, we do carry oxygen cylinders. It's the same thing because we are not tuned to breathe underwater for a longer period of time. Sometimes the oxygen levels is not enough for our complex bodies to do so. So what we do, the divers which go underwater, they all carry oxygen cylinders. It's either way which happens. They want more oxygen and we cannot sustain with that amount of oxygen underwater. So what we do, we carry those cylinders. Simple experiment that carbon dioxide is being liberated during exhale, that is whenever we breathe, the carbon dioxide is given out, right? So you all know, you must be studying this experiment right from your smaller or lower classes. You all know that lime water does turn carbon dioxide milky. Now, how does it happen? So this is a small experiment to understand, which is like you are passing air through a kind of a tube to the lime water. Now, this and this both contain air, but what is the difference between these two? Here we are utilizing only the exhaled air, where here we are using the air from the outside. So this is the exhaled air from our mouth, and this is the air which comes from the outside. Now, when you look at these two conditions, you find the exhaled air turns the lime water milky within short period of time, whereas this particular air, it takes more amount of time for it to convert it. Now, why is that so? Because in our exhaled air, we have more amount of carbon dioxide being liberated, which makes the lime water go milky in that particular place, right? Now, that the equation for this is because this lime water is nothing but calcium hydroxide. This calcium hydroxide, when it combines with carbon dioxide, it liberates calcium carbonate. Okay, this calcium carbonate in turn times, this is the one which gives that milky precipitate or a white colored precipitate. Now, this happens because of calcium carbonate. Now, the simple experiment to understand that what we breathe out contains more carbon dioxide as compared to other kind of animals. Okay. Now, looking at the general questions which come from this particular topic, we have the first question. We already discussed about this. What advantage does a terrestrial organism have against an aquatic organism? We understood already that the aquatic organism will need more oxygen because the water contains less amount of dissolved oxygen. And terrestrial animals can have a better adaptation because the lungs help them in getting that kind of oxygen which is necessary for it. Now, the second one, why is cramping produced in human muscles? This is because of inadequate amount of oxygen, or the oxygen is utilized in a higher level so that the oxygen is not enough for doing those activities. Now, what happens? Your muscles will start producing what is called as the lactic acid, which provides this particular cramping of the muscles. And this is especially seen in people who are athletes because they utilize a lot of oxygen. And you must have seen many people taking in glucose so that they get back that energy level. So glucose is one form which gives us instant energy. Now, third one, what is the energy released from one molecule of ATP? If I am converting ATP, it is 30.5 kilojoules. Now, let's try to understand what is ATP. Okay. So how do we get ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. We have already given this. This ATP is produced by the combination of ADP plus pi. ADP is adenosine diphosphate. You add an inorganic phosphate molecule and then it converts into ATP. And all this process takes place in mitochondria. And as I already told you, different foods have different amounts of energy liberated in that particular place. Now, ATP pockets of energy or energy currency of the cell, which is produced from mitochondria. And the only place you have maximum energy liberation is mitochondria. Now, the previous year questions. Rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is much faster than the terrestrial organisms. The reasons he has asked. The same thing here, because they need more oxygen to do their activities and water doesn't have that much of oxygen. So they breathe faster to get that amount of oxygen. So faster they breathe, open and closing of the mouth, so that they can get that amount of energy needed for them. So the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is generally higher as compared to that of terrestrial organisms. Now the second one, how do plants differ in respiration from animals? Now plants do not have any kind of special respiratory processes, because respiration is actually a waste of energy when it comes to plants, but still plants respire during the night time. And the exchange of gases during the daytime occurs through stomata. So the organs which help in respiration are stomata when it comes to plants, but respiration process as such does not occur much in plants, and it is of no use to them except that the energy gets wasted. So some of the plants have this mechanism to avoid this kind of respiration because there is misuse of energy. But animals, we do have to have this respiration, because unless oxidation occurs with the help of the food which is digested, we will not be able to do our normal metabolic activities on everyday basis. So for us, respiration is very important, because our body is much complex and we need more energy. Because we are heterotrophic, plants can produce their own food, so they do not have to move from place to place. They will not require as much as energy as required by animals. Okay, now that's the answer for the second one. Now the third one is respiration and exothermic reaction. So what do you mean by exothermic reaction? You all know reactions are of two types, endothermic and exothermic. Exo means liberating the energy or heat to the outside, whereas endothermic is taking the heat inside. Now, respiration is an exothermic reaction because it is liberating energy in the form of ATP. So we have seen the equation when we did the aerobic, the respiration part. So we understood that there is liberation of energy in the form of ATP. Now, since it liberates energy by the breakdown of glucose, we give the term exothermic reaction. But when we take that particular energy and use it for various activities, then the reaction becomes endothermic, because we are utilizing that particular energy which is liberated through the process, utilizing it and then doing various activities. So respiration is exothermic, but utilizing it for various activities will be endothermic. It will be endothermic. Now, this is all about the introduction of this particular chapter. So the next session we will be doing human respiratory system and what are the different organs, and why is the human respiratory system, what is the purpose of lungs, why is it needed, and what is the platform on which exchange of gases take place. All that we'll be doing in the coming session. So that's all for today, and thank you.